A white cop shoots a black man's daughter, claiming it was a split-second decision. But what he doesn't know? The girl's father is a lethal Delta Force commander, trained to take down enemies on the battlefield. And now, the war has come home. As the police try to cover up the truth, this father will stop at nothing to unravel the corruption, expose the lies, and make them pay. But when he gets closer to the truth, he realizes this was never just an accident. So what really happened that day? And what will he do when he finally uncovers the chilling secret they never wanted him to find? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Malcolm Hayes stood at his kitchen window, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. The familiar weight of his tactical gear was gone, replaced by comfortable civilian clothes, a soft cotton t-shirt and well-worn jeans. After weeks of training elite military units, being home felt like stepping into a different world entirely. Behind him, the sounds of his family filled the kitchen with warmth. Pots clinked against the stovetop as Jada stirred something that smelled amazing. Her humming mixed with Naima's cheerful chatter, creating the kind of peaceful moment he treasured most. "Daddy, you should have seen me at practice today." Naima's eyes sparkled as she set the table, carefully placing each fork exactly where it belonged. "Ms. Thompson said my vibrato is getting so much better. She thinks I might be ready for a solo at the spring recital." Malcolm turned from the window, his heart swelling with pride. At 12, Naima was already showing the kind of dedication that made great musicians. "Is that right?" He smiled, pulling out a chair. "Well, then we definitely need to hear this improved vibrato of yours after dinner." "Malcolm, don't get her started now," Jada laughed, carrying a steaming casserole to the table. Her dark curls were pulled back in a neat bun, a few strands escaping to frame her face. "You know, once she gets that violin out, we won't hear the end of it until bedtime." "Please, Mom." Naima batted her eyelashes dramatically. "Just one piece?" "After dinner," Jada said firmly, but her eyes were soft with affection. "Now sit down, both of you, before this gets cold." They settled around the table, passing dishes and falling into the comfortable rhythm of family dinner. Malcolm savored each bite, letting the tensions of his work fade away. Here, he wasn't Staff Sergeant Hayes, responsible for training the nation's most elite warriors. Here, he was just Dad, listening to his daughter's stories about school and violin practice. "Can I go to the store?" Naima asked suddenly, pushing her empty plate away. "I really want a Snickers bar." Jada frowned. "Baby, it's getting dark." "It's just 2 blocks, Naima protested. "Please? I got an A on my history test today. Consider it my reward." Malcolm glanced at his watch. The sun hadn't quite set, and the corner store was visible from their front porch. He remembered being 12, wanting to prove his independence. "She'll be fine, Jada," he said. "The walk will do her good." Jada still looked uncertain but nodded. "Straight there and straight back," she instructed. "No detours." "Yes." Naima jumped up, hugging them both. "Thanks, Mom." "Thanks, Dad." She grabbed her purple jacket from the hook by the door, practically bouncing with excitement. Malcolm watched from the porch as she headed down the sidewalk, her braids swinging with each step. A small worry nagged at him, the same worry that always surfaced when she was out of his sight. But he pushed it away. She was growing up. He couldn't keep her in a bubble forever. He was about to head back inside when the crack of a gunshot split the evening air. Malcolm's body reacted before his mind could process. He was already running, combat instincts taking over, his heart thundering against his ribs. People were gathering at the corner store, their voices raised in shock and anger. Through the gaps between bodies, he caught glimpses of something on the pavement, something small, wearing a purple jacket. Number. The crowd parted as he approached, and the world tilted on its axis. Naima lay motionless on the concrete, a crimson stain spreading across her chest. Officer Greg Lawson stood over her, his service weapon still drawn, face twisted in what looked like fear. "She didn't have anything." The store clerk's voice shook as he shouted from the doorway. "She was just a kid." The police radio on Lawson's shoulder crackled to life. Officer involved shooting. Suspect armed. Malcolm's vision went red. He lunged forward, every fiber of his being focused on reaching his daughter, on tearing apart the man who had shot her. But before he could get there, multiple officers appeared, tackling him to the ground. His military training screamed at him to fight back, to break their holds, but he forced himself to stay still. Fighting would only delay him from reaching Naima. Behind him, he heard Jada's scream. It was a sound he would never forget, raw, primal, the cry of a mother seeing her child's blood on the sidewalk. She ran past him, dropping to her knees beside Naima. "Please," she sobbed. "Please, baby, open your eyes." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Malcolm struggled to keep his breathing steady as the officers hauled him to his feet. They zip-tied his hands behind his back, shoving him toward a patrol car. As they pushed his head down to force him into the back seat, his eyes met Lawson's. The officer's face showed no remorse, no horror at what he'd done, just cold indifference, as if Naima were nothing more than a problem he'd solved. In that moment, as paramedics rushed to where his daughter lay bleeding, Malcolm knew with absolute certainty, this wasn't a mistake. This was something else entirely, something darker and more deliberate than a simple error in judgment. The patrol car door slammed shut, and Malcolm watched through the window as the paramedics lifted Naima onto a stretcher. Jada climbed into the ambulance with her, still crying, while Lawson stood calmly giving his statement to other officers. The scene burned itself into Malcolm's memory, his daughter's blood on the pavement, his wife's tears, and Lawson's unflinching stare. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the police interrogation room, casting harsh shadows across Malcolm's face. His wrists ached from the handcuffs that bit into his skin, handcuffs he didn't deserve. The metal chair was cold and uncomfortable, but Malcolm barely noticed. His mind was consumed with images of Naima lying on that sidewalk, of Jada's desperate screams, of Officer Lawson's indifferent stare. Hours had passed since they'd brought him in. Every minute felt like torture, knowing his daughter was fighting for her life while he sat here, helpless. The door opened with a metallic click, and a detective walked in carrying a thin file folder. Malcolm recognized the smug look on his face. He'd seen it countless times before, that expression of assumed authority. "Mr. Hayes," the detective said, settling into the chair across from him, "we need to get your statement before you can see your daughter." Malcolm's jaw clenched so tight he could hear his teeth grinding. The rage that had been simmering since the shooting threatened to boil over. But years of military discipline held him in check. One wrong move now would only keep him from Naima longer. "My daughter was shot," Malcolm said, his voice low and controlled. "She needs her father." The detective shrugged, spreading papers across the table. "The sooner we get through this, the sooner you can leave. Now, why don't you tell me what happened tonight?" Across town, Jada stood at the emergency room reception desk, her hands trembling as she filled out form after form. Her lawyer's briefcase hung forgotten at her side, her usually immaculate appearance disheveled from the nightmare of the evening. The receptionist barely glanced at her, continuing to type on her computer as if Jada wasn't even there. "Excuse me," Jada said, her voice hoarse from crying. "My daughter was just brought in with a gunshot wound. Please, I need to know how she is." The receptionist didn't look up. "Fill out the forms completely. Someone will call you when there's information." "But she's only 12, Jada pleaded. "She's alone back there." A white nurse passing by stopped, taking in Jada's distress. "Is everything okay here?" she asked, stepping closer to the desk. "My daughter, Naima Hayes. She was just brought in by ambulance. Please, I just need to know if she's alive." The nurse's expression softened. "Let me check for you." She moved behind the desk, gently pushing the receptionist aside to access the computer. As she typed, the automatic doors whooshed open, and Ben Thompson hurried in. Malcolm's friend from his Delta Force days was still in his business suit, having left work the moment Jada called him. Suddenly, the entire atmosphere changed. The receptionist sat up straighter. A doctor appeared almost immediately, clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, looking between Ben and Jada, "your daughter is in surgery. The bullet missed her vital organs, but there's significant tissue damage. We'll know more in a few hours." Jada sagged with relief and Ben steadied her with a hand on her shoulder. "What about her father?" he asked. "Malcolm Hayes?" "We haven't received any information about him," the doctor replied. "He's being held at the police station," Ben said, his voice tight with anger. "I'll make some calls." Back at the precinct, Malcolm endured question after question, each one designed to twist the truth of what happened. They wanted him to slip up, to give them something they could use to justify Lawson's actions. But Malcolm had been trained to withstand interrogation by experts far more skilled than these officers. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the door opened again. This time, a senior officer entered, looking annoyed. "Release him," he ordered. "His lawyer's here." The handcuffs came off, leaving angry red marks on Malcolm's wrists. He didn't wait for further instruction, striding out of the interrogation room with purpose. In the hallway, he found Ben waiting with a grim expression. "I've got a car outside," Ben said. "Jada's at the hospital. Naima's in surgery, but she's fighting." Malcolm's steps faltered for just a moment as relief warred with fury in his chest. They hurried through the station, ignoring the stares of other officers. Outside, the night air was cool against Malcolm's face, but he barely felt it. His entire being was focused on getting to his family. The hospital corridors were a blur as Malcolm followed Ben to the surgical waiting area. He found Jada sitting alone, her head bowed, hands clasped as if in prayer. When she looked up, her tear-streaked face told a story of hours of anguish. "She's alive," Jada whispered as Malcolm pulled her into his arms. "The doctor said the bullet missed her heart by inches." Relief washed through Malcolm like a tidal wave, nearly bringing him to his knees. But close on its heels came a surge of rage as a nearby television caught his attention. The news was already running the story. The ticker at the bottom reading, "9-year-old black girl shot in officer-involved incident." The details were vague, carefully worded to avoid any hint of police wrongdoing. Then the channel changed and Malcolm's blood ran cold. Another station had a different take. Gang-affiliated suspect shot in altercation with police. They showed Naima's school picture, but beneath it, they'd placed an image of gang graffiti, creating a visual connection that made Malcolm's stomach turn. "They're trying to justify it," he growled, his hands clenching into fists. "They're trying to make our baby girl look like a criminal." Before Jada could respond, a nurse appeared. "Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, Naima's out of surgery. You can see her now." They followed her down a quiet hallway to a private room. The sight of Naima in that hospital bed, small and pale against the white sheets, tubes, and wires connecting her to various machines, nearly broke Malcolm. Her right hand was heavily bandaged where the bullet had torn through it before entering her chest. Malcolm moved to her bedside, carefully taking her uninjured hand in his. Her skin felt cool to the touch, but he could feel her pulse. Steady, strong, fighting. Just like his girl always did. "I'm here, baby," he whispered, bending close to her ear. "Daddy's here." But even as he spoke the words, Malcolm knew they weren't enough. Being here, holding her hand, watching over her sleep, it wasn't enough. Not when the people who did this were out there, spinning their lies, protecting their own. Not when his daughter's innocence was being twisted into something sinister on national television. He had to fight. For Naima, for every child who looked like her, for every parent who lived with the same fear he and Jada carried every day. The question was, how? Malcolm jerked awake in the uncomfortable hospital waiting room chair, his neck stiff from the awkward angle. The television mounted on the wall droned on with morning news, its fluorescent glare harsh against his tired eyes. He looked down at his shirt, still stained with Naima's blood from when he'd tried to reach her on the street. The dark patches had turned brown, a cruel reminder of how long they'd been here. "Malcolm," Jada's voice was urgent as she shook his shoulder. She pointed at the TV screen, where a news anchor was announcing an upcoming press conference about the shooting. "They're about to make a statement." He straightened in his chair, every muscle in his body tensing. The camera panned across City Hall's front steps, where reporters gathered like vultures, microphones and cameras at the ready. The mayor approached the podium, his face arranged in what he probably thought was an appropriately concerned expression. Police Chief Michael Barrett stood to his right, back straight, chin lifted with barely concealed arrogance. Officer Lawson lingered slightly behind them, looking uncomfortable in his dress uniform. "My fellow citizens," the mayor began, his voice carrying that practiced tone of false sincerity that Malcolm had heard too many times before. "We are here to address the unfortunate incident that occurred last night in our community." Malcolm's jaw clenched at the word incident. His daughter being shot wasn't an incident, it was an attack, a crime, an attempted murder. "The department is conducting a thorough investigation," the mayor continued, "and we ask for patience from the community during this process. Chief Barrett will now provide more details about the ongoing investigation." Barrett stepped forward, his silver badge gleaming under the morning sun. At approximately 7:45 p.m. yesterday evening, Officer Lawson responded to a suspicious person call at the corner market on Pine Street. During the encounter, a shot was fired and a minor was injured. Officer Lawson followed all departmental procedures, and we stand behind his actions pending the completion of our internal investigation. The assembled reporters erupted with questions. Barrett pointed to a woman in the front row. "Officer Lawson," she called out, "do you regret your actions last night?" Lawson stepped forward, and Malcolm felt his blood pressure spike. The officer cleared his throat, his voice steady but rehearsed. "We have to make split-second decisions in this line of work. If I hesitate, I might not make it home." He paused, letting his words sink in. "It's unfortunate what happened, but I acted according to my training." Malcolm's fists clenched so tight his nails dug into his palms. Beside him, Jada gasped as Barrett gestured to a large screen behind them. A grainy security camera image appeared, showing Naima standing in the store's entrance. Her small hands were raised in what was clearly terror, but the freeze frame made it look like she was reaching for something. "As you can see from this security footage," Barrett said, his voice carrying an air of authority that made Malcolm's stomach turn. "The situation was unclear. Officer Lawson had to make a quick judgment call." "That's not what happened," Jada whispered fiercely, her lawyer's mind already cataloging the manipulation at play. "They're deliberately misrepresenting the footage. They're not showing what happened before or after." On screen, Barrett continued his performance. "We ask the community to remember that our officers put their lives on the line every day. They deserve the benefit of the doubt while we complete our investigation." Malcolm stood up so suddenly his chair scraped against the floor, drawing looks from other people in the waiting room. He couldn't listen to any more of this. His daughter was lying in a hospital bed with a bullet wound, and these men were standing there twisting the truth, making excuses for shooting an innocent child. "Malcolm!" Jada called after him as he strode toward the exit. "Malcolm, wait!" But he couldn't wait. He couldn't sit there and watch them paint his little girl as a threat. Couldn't listen to them justify what they'd done to her. His combat boots echoed against the linoleum as he pushed through the hospital doors into the parking lot. The morning air was cool, but Malcolm barely felt it. His car sat where he'd left it the night before, after Ben had driven them to the hospital. He yanked open the driver's side door and slid behind the wheel, gripping it so hard his knuckles turned white. His training had taught him to control his emotions, to channel anger into tactical thinking. But this was different. This was his daughter. This was everything he'd fought to protect her from, everything he'd hoped she'd never have to face. "They want war?" he whispered to himself, his voice low and dangerous in the quiet car. "They'll get war." The military surplus store sat in a strip mall on the outskirts of town, its windows covered in faded American flag decals and "Support Our Troops" stickers. Malcolm pulled into the nearly empty parking lot, his mind already cataloging what he needed. He'd been here before, usually for camping gear or workout equipment, but today's shopping list was different. The bell above the door chimed as he entered. Tom, the elderly owner and fellow veteran, looked up from his crossword puzzle and smiled. "Malcolm, haven't seen you in a while. How's the family?" Malcolm's jaw tightened, but he forced a neutral expression. "Fine, Tom. Just need to pick up a few things." He moved through the aisles with purpose, grabbing items and mentally checking them off his list. 2 burner phones, basic models that wouldn't draw attention. A set of tactical gloves, black and flexible. High-quality surveillance equipment, nothing military-grade but good enough for what he needed. Mini cameras, listening devices, things that could be easily concealed. "Doing some security work?" Tom asked as Malcolm placed the items on the counter. "Something like that," Malcolm replied, pulling out cash. He'd stopped at an ATM earlier. No credit card traces, nothing to track. Tom rang up the purchases without further questions. That's what Malcolm had always appreciated about him, the understanding that sometimes a man needed things without explaining why. Back in his car, Malcolm methodically checked each item, ensuring everything worked properly. His hands moved with the precision of years of military training, testing equipment he hoped he wouldn't need to use for long. He wasn't planning to kill anyone, not yet. But he would find out the truth about what happened to his daughter, about why a police officer had shot a 9-year-old girl holding nothing but a candy bar. The afternoon sun was setting when Malcolm parked in an isolated spot near the police precinct. He'd chosen this location carefully, close enough to pick up radio signals, far enough to avoid detection. The scanner equipment was simple to set up. He'd done similar operations in war zones with far less. As he adjusted the frequency, static crackled through his earpiece. Then voices began to emerge, clear and casual. Routine calls at first, traffic stops, domestic disturbances, the usual evening activity. Malcolm waited patiently, listening for anything relevant. After an hour, a conversation caught his attention. 2 officers speaking in low tones. "We need to get ahead of this before that soldier boy gets any ideas." Malcolm's hands stilled. They were talking about him. "Relax," the second voice replied, sounding bored. "Internal affairs is on our side. It'll blow over in a week." The casual dismissal in their voices made Malcolm's blood boil. They weren't worried about justice or truth. They were worried about covering their tracks. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed, protecting its own at the expense of everyone else. His phone buzzed, Jada calling. He answered, keeping his voice low. "Hey." "I just met with Sharon Thompson," Jada said, naming a prominent civil rights attorney she'd worked with before. "Malcolm, it's not good. The DA won't touch this case. Sharon says we need evidence, hard evidence, or it'll be just another internal investigation that goes nowhere." Malcolm watched a patrol car cruise past his position, its occupants oblivious to his presence. What kind of evidence? Anything that proves Lawson's story is false. Witness statements, video footage, documentation of previous incidents, anything that shows a pattern or contradicts the official report. Malcolm thought about the equipment in his trunk, about the conversation he'd just heard. "I'll handle it." "Malcolm," Jada's voice held a warning. "Whatever you're thinking, I'm not going to do anything stupid," he assured her, though his definition of stupid might differ from hers right now. "I'm just going to get what we need." After ending the call, Malcolm drove across town to a quiet suburban neighborhood. Greg Lawson's address hadn't been hard to find, not for someone with Malcolm's training and connections. The house was modest, set back from the street behind a well-maintained lawn. A patrol car sat in the driveway, its white paint gleaming under the streetlights. Malcolm parked down the block, killing the engine but leaving the keys in the ignition. Through his windshield, he could see Lawson moving around inside the house, visible through gaps in the curtains. The officer appeared relaxed, comfortable, as if he hadn't just shot an innocent child 24 hours ago. Malcolm's hands gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. It would be so easy to walk up to that front door, to deal with Lawson the way he dealt with threats in combat. One quick, efficient movement. That's all it would take to snap the man's neck. But that wouldn't help Naima. It wouldn't fix the system that had allowed this to happen. It wouldn't bring justice, only revenge. Instead, Malcolm reached for his bag and pulled out a tiny recording device, its lens no bigger than a pencil eraser. He held it up, studying it in the dim light filtering through his windshield. "Let's see what you're hiding, officer," he whispered, his voice cold and determined in the quiet car. The device felt light in his palm, but Malcolm knew its power. In the right places, capturing the right moments, it could bring down not just one corrupt cop, but an entire system built on protecting men like Lawson. Malcolm had learned in combat that sometimes the smallest weapons could be the most effective. Now, in this different kind of war, he would use that knowledge to expose the truth they tried so hard to hide. Hours later, the night air was crisp as Malcolm sat in his parked car, positioned strategically down the block from Officer Lawson's house. The surveillance equipment hummed quietly beside him, recording every transmission that crackled through the police frequencies. His military training had taught him patience, but watching Lawson's silhouette move carelessly behind the curtains tested his restraint. Lawson emerged from his front door, phone pressed to his ear, looking completely unbothered. His laugh carried through the quiet street, making Malcolm's jaw clench. Here was a man who had shot a 9-year-old girl just days ago, acting like he didn't have a care in the world. Malcolm adjusted the scanner's frequency, fine-tuning it until Lawson's voice came through clear and sharp. The officer was talking to another cop, their casual conversation making Malcolm's blood run cold. "Can you believe they're making a big deal out of this?" Lawson's voice crackled through the speaker. A second voice responded, equally dismissive. "Kid was just in the wrong place. Don't know why they're all so mad." "Yeah, well, let's make sure our paperwork is clean. Don't need IA sniffing around." Malcolm's hands tightened on the steering wheel until it creaked under his grip. The casual way they discussed Naima's shooting, like it was nothing more than a minor inconvenience in their day, made his vision blur with rage. But rage wouldn't help him now. He needed evidence, concrete proof that would expose their corruption. Lawson got into his patrol car and pulled out of his driveway. Malcolm waited a few moments before following at a safe distance, keeping 3 cars between them at all times. The patrol car wound through the city streets until it pulled into the parking lot of the Blue Line, a worn-down dive bar known as a cop hangout. Malcolm parked across the street watching as Lawson joined a group of officers at an outdoor table. Their loud laughter carried across the parking lot, mixing with the sound of clinking bottles and the distant thrum of traffic. Moving silently, Malcolm made his way around the building's perimeter. The back alley was dark and littered with empty boxes and trash bins, perfect cover for what he needed to do. He pulled out one of the tiny surveillance devices he'd purchased earlier, no bigger than a quarter. With practiced efficiency, he attached it to the underside of a window ledge, positioning it to capture both audio and video of the officer's table. The device connected to his phone, and clear audio began streaming through his earpiece. He could hear every word of their conversation, their casual jokes about cleanup duty and standard procedure, making his stomach turn. "What are you doing back here?" The voice behind him was quiet but firm. Malcolm spun around, his body automatically shifting into a defensive stance. A woman stood there, her badge glinting in the dim light. Detective Sarah Nolan. Malcolm recognized her from the press conference. She was one of the few officers who hadn't been smirking during the chief's statement. Malcolm's mind raced through his options. He could take her down. She wasn't built for combat like he was, but that would only make things worse. Before he could move, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're not the only one who wants justice." Malcolm didn't lower his guard. A cop? Wanting justice? His voice dripped with skepticism. Sarah glanced over her shoulder before stepping closer. "There's a unit within the department. Unofficial, of course. They specialize in planting evidence, covering up shootings, making problems disappear. I've been investigating them for months." "Why should I believe you?" "Because Lawson isn't smart enough to orchestrate this cover-up on his own. He's just a puppet. The real problem is higher up." She met Malcolm's gaze steadily. Chief Barrett and his inner circle, they're the ones pulling the strings. Malcolm studied her face, looking for any sign of deception. His years in special operations had taught him to read people, to spot lies in the smallest twitch of an expression. But Sarah's eyes held only determination and what looked like genuine anger. "I've got files," she continued. "Documentation of similar incidents, altered reports, witness statements that mysteriously disappeared. Evidence that proves this isn't just about one bad cop. It's about a system designed to protect them all." Malcolm remained silent, processing this information. Working with a cop went against every instinct he had right now. But if what she was saying was true... Sarah reached into her jacket and pulled out a USB drive. "Look at what's on here. Then decide if you want to work alone." She held it out, her hand steady. Malcolm took the drive, his movements careful and measured. Sarah watched him pocket it, then glanced back toward the bar. "They'll notice if I'm gone too long," she said. "Whatever you decide, be careful. These people, they'll do anything to keep their power." She turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner of the building as silently as she had appeared. Malcolm stood in the darkness, feeling the weight of the USB drive in his pocket. He didn't trust cops, couldn't trust them, not after what happened to Naima. But Sarah's words rang true. This war couldn't be won alone. The laughter from the officer's table drifted through his earpiece, reminding him of why he was here. He checked the surveillance device one last time, ensuring it was properly hidden and transmitting, then made his way back to his car. The USB drive felt heavy in his pocket, like it carried the weight of all the secrets these corrupt officers had tried to bury. In the dim light of his garage, Malcolm sat at his workbench, his laptop humming quietly as he inserted the USB drive Sarah had given him. His hands were steady, but his heart raced with anticipation. The screen flickered to life, revealing folders upon folders of documents, videos, and emails. The first video he opened was body cam footage from a shooting 6 months ago. A young black man, hands clearly raised, was gunned down by officers claiming he had reached for a weapon. Malcolm's jaw clenched as he watched the officers plant a gun near the victim's body after the fact. The official report labeled it a justified shooting. Another file contained emails between Police Chief Michael Barrett and various department heads. The casual way they discussed covering up police brutality made Malcolm's stomach turn. "Need that gun from evidence logged as found at the scene," one email read. "Make sure Johnson's body cam malfunctioned during the critical moment." "Internal Affairs is asking questions," another message stated. "Tell them it's a sensitive operation. That usually shuts them up." Document after document revealed a pattern that made Malcolm's blood run cold. A special task force operating under Barrett's direct command had been targeting black neighborhoods for years. They stopped people without cause, planted evidence, and fabricated charges. When citizens complained, the department buried the reports. When officers spoke up, they were transferred or forced out. The deeper Malcolm dug, the clearer the picture became. Naima's shooting wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a systematic campaign of intimidation and control. The task force had even kept detailed records of their operations, complete with quotas for arrests and asset seizures. Malcolm found a spreadsheet tracking settlement payments to victims' families. Next to each entry were notes about how to minimize media coverage and maintain community control. His daughter's name was already on the list with a proposed settlement amount and strategy for managing public perception. His hands shook as he opened another video file. This one showed Officer Lawson at a briefing, receiving instructions from Chief Barrett himself. "Remember?" Barrett's voice rang clear through the speakers. "These neighborhoods need to know who's in charge. Make examples when necessary." The evidence was overwhelming, not just about Naima's shooting, but about years of orchestrated corruption that went all the way to the top. Malcolm copied everything to his own hard drive, his military training kicking in as he created multiple backups and secure storage locations. When Jada arrived home from the hospital, Malcolm led her to the garage. She stood behind him, gripping the back of his chair as he showed her file after file. Her legal training helped her understand exactly what they were seeing and what it meant. "This is..." Jada's voice trembled with rage. "This is systematic. They've been doing this for years." She grabbed Malcolm's shoulder. "Why are we still talking? This needs to be on the news. We have to release all of it." Malcolm was about to agree when his phone buzzed. It was Sarah. "Don't release anything yet." Sarah's voice was urgent through the speaker. "It's not enough." "Not enough?" Jada exploded. "We have emails, videos, their own documents proving they're covering up crimes." "And they'll call it all fake," Sarah countered. "They'll say the emails were doctored, the videos edited. Without someone from inside the department confirming this evidence, it's just files on a drive that could have come from anywhere." Malcolm knew she was right. His military experience had taught him that timing was everything in an operation. Release the evidence too soon, and they'd lose their only advantage. Jada paced the garage, her legal mind working through scenarios. "We need whistleblowers. Officers willing to testify that these documents are real. That's what I'm working on, Sarah said. There are others in the department who are sick of this corruption. We just need to… Malcolm's other phone, the burner he used for surveillance, started ringing. The number was blocked. He put it on speaker. Back off, soldier boy. The voice was electronically distorted, impossible to identify. You don't want this fight. Malcolm's face hardened. Who is this? Your daughter was just a warning. The voice continued, ignoring his question. Next time, it'll be your wife. Jada's eyes widened, but she didn't flinch. Malcolm's voice was deadly calm when he responded. Then I guess I have no choice but to bring the fight to them. The line went dead. Malcolm looked at Jada, seeing his own determination reflected in her eyes. They both knew there was no turning back now. The threat had only confirmed what the evidence showed. This went deeper than they'd imagined, and the people behind it would stop at nothing to keep their power. Sarah's voice came through the other phone, still on speaker. They're scared. They wouldn't be making threats if they weren't scared. Malcolm nodded, his jaw tight. The garage felt smaller suddenly, the walls closing in with the weight of what they'd discovered and what they had to do next. The evidence on the USB drive wasn't just data anymore. It was ammunition in a war they never wanted but now had to fight. The surveillance equipment on his workbench, the copies of the files, the burner phones, everything had seemed like tools for gathering information. Now they were weapons in a battle for justice, for change, for his family's safety. And Malcolm Hayes, former Delta Force operative, father and husband, would use every single one of them. The morning sun cast long shadows across Malcolm's face as he stood at the edge of the growing crowd outside the police station. Hundreds of people had gathered, their signs held high, their voices united in demands for justice. Justice for Naima, they chanted. No more police violence. Malcolm scanned the crowd with practiced precision, his military training kicking in automatically. Something didn't feel right. There, near the back, a man in casual clothes but wearing military-grade boots. By the coffee shop, another man whose stance screamed law enforcement. Near the front, a woman whose communication earpiece was barely visible beneath her hair. He counted at least 12 undercover officers scattered throughout the crowd. They weren't there to protect anyone. Their positions were too strategic, too calculated for that. Community leaders stood on the steps of the police station, their voices amplified by megaphones. Reverend Thompson, a respected local pastor, spoke about unity and peaceful resistance. Mrs. Anderson from the neighborhood council detailed statistics about police violence. Their words were powerful, but Malcolm barely heard them. He was too focused on the undercover officers who kept shifting positions, slowly moving closer to the center of the crowd. Malcolm pulled out his police scanner, adjusting the frequency until voices crackled through. All units in position? A voice asked. Affirmative. Waiting for the signal. Remember the plan. Let them get angry. The second a window breaks, we declare a riot. Malcolm's jaw tightened as another voice added, arrest as many as possible. Make sure it looks like we're maintaining order. The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't about maintaining peace. It was about creating chaos. They wanted to discredit the protesters, to paint them as violent troublemakers who needed to be controlled. Malcolm had seen similar tactics in war zones, but never expected to witness them on American streets. He spotted Jada near the front of the crowd, speaking with reporters from local news stations. Her voice was clear and strong as she detailed Naima's shooting, the corruption they'd uncovered, the pattern of police violence. The reporters leaned in, captivated by her words and legal expertise. Malcolm started pushing through the crowd, trying to reach the protest leaders. He had to warn them about what was coming, but the crowd was too dense, too tightly packed. People pressed against him from all sides, their bodies radiating anger and determination. He was still 20 feet from the steps when he saw one of the undercover officers make his move. The man pulled a brick from his backpack, his movements quick and practiced. Before Malcolm could shout a warning, the brick sailed through the air and crashed through the window of a nearby electronics store. The sound of breaking glass was like a starter's pistol. Instantly, Riot police emerged from every direction, their black armor gleaming in the morning sun. Tear gas canisters arced through the air, trailing white smoke as they landed among the protesters. The peaceful crowd erupted into chaos. People screamed and ran, their eyes burning from the gas. The riot police advanced in formation, their batons swinging indiscriminately. Malcolm saw peaceful protesters being tackled to the ground, their hands zip-tied behind their backs. Across the street, a group of white counter-protesters stood watching, completely untouched by the police. They held signs supporting Officer Lawson and the department, but the riot police ignored them completely. Some even smiled and nodded at the counter-protesters as they dragged arrested demonstrators past them. Malcolm's eyes burned from the tear gas, but he kept moving forward, desperately searching for Jada. He found her still near the front, trying to help an elderly woman who had fallen in the chaos. Two riot officers grabbed Jada from behind, yanking her arms behind her back. "I'm an attorney!" Jada shouted. "You have no right—" One of the officers cut her off, roughly shoving her forward. "Save it for the judge," he sneered. Malcolm surged forward, but more officers blocked his path. He watched helplessly as they dragged Jada toward a waiting police van. Her eyes found his through the chaos, and she screamed his name. "Malcolm, Malcolm!" The desperation in her voice cut through him like a knife. His hands clenched into fists as the police van's doors slammed shut with Jada inside. The vehicle pulled away from the curb, carrying his wife and dozens of other peaceful protesters to jail. Malcolm stood in the middle of the street, tear gas swirling around him, his body vibrating with rage. They had planned this. They had deliberately turned a peaceful protest into chaos to discredit the movement. And now they had taken Jada. His knuckles turned white as he gripped his fists tighter. They just made their biggest mistake. Malcolm's footsteps echoed softly through the dimly lit corridors of police headquarters. His heart pounded against his ribs, but his hands remained steady, the same steadiness he'd relied on during countless military operations. Sarah's stolen keycard felt heavy in his pocket, a constant reminder of how much was at stake. The late-night cleaning crew had already finished their rounds, leaving the building nearly empty except for the skeleton crew of night shift officers. Malcolm had memorized their patrol patterns from Sarah's intel. 3 minutes between security sweeps on this floor. More than enough time. He approached a door marked Records Division and pulled out Sarah's keycard. The reader blinked red once, then green. Malcolm slipped inside, closing the door silently behind him. The room smelled of old paper and printer toner, filled with rows of filing cabinets and computer terminals. Malcolm moved to the nearest computer, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he input the login credentials Sarah had provided. The prisoner database loaded slowly, too slowly for his racing thoughts. Every second felt like an eternity when Jada was locked up somewhere in the system. Finally, the records appeared. Malcolm typed Jada's name, and his blood ran cold at what he found. Her booking photo showed her face streaked with tears and tear gas residue, but her eyes blazed with defiance. Below the photo, red text marked her status. Violent protester. Extended detention authorized. No, 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 Malcolm muttered, digging deeper into the database. It wasn't just Jada. Every black protester arrested at the demonstration had been flagged with similar designations. Gang affiliation. History of violence. Flight risk. All fabricated charges designed to keep them locked up as long as possible. His phone buzzed, a text from Sarah. "You in?" Malcolm's fingers trembled with rage as he replied, "Found it. They're setting them all up." "Don't do anything stupid," Sarah texted back. "Meet me at the usual spot in 20. Malcolm wanted to tear the place apart, to confront every officer involved and make them pay. Instead, he took several deep breaths, remembering his military training. Emotion clouds judgment. Strategy wins wars. He downloaded the prisoner logs onto a USB drive and carefully logged out of the system, leaving no trace of his presence. The corridor was still empty as he slipped out of the records division and made his way to the exit. 20 minutes later, Malcolm found Sarah waiting in her car behind an abandoned warehouse. Her face was drawn with worry as he slid into the passenger seat. "Show me what you found," she said. Malcolm handed her the USB drive. Sarah plugged it into her laptop, her expression darkening as she scrolled through the files. This is worse than I thought. They're systematically targeting black protesters, making sure they stay in the system as long as possible. I'm getting Jada out, Malcolm said, his voice hard. Tonight? Sarah grabbed his arm. If you go in guns blazing, you'll just prove them right. They'll paint you as the angry black man they always claimed you were. Is that what you want? To give them exactly what they're looking for? Malcolm's jaw clenched. Then what do you suggest? We play this smart, Sarah said, pulling out her phone. I know a journalist at the City Times. She's been investigating police corruption for months. These logs would blow her story wide open. And Jada? The others? A small smile crossed Sarah's face. I'm still on the force, remember? I have access to prisoner transport schedules. One phone call to reroute a van, another to create a paperwork mix-up. Accidents happen all the time in our bureaucracy. Malcolm studied her face. Why are you helping us? Because I became a cop to protect people, not terrorize them, Sarah said quietly. What they did to your daughter? It could have been my little sister, my nephew. This has to stop. They spent the next hour planning. Sarah sent the prisoner logs to her journalist contact while Malcolm created a digital trail that would lead investigators away from them. By midnight, Sarah had arranged for a prisoner transport van to take an alternate route, one that would end with Jada and the other protesters being released at a location far from police surveillance. Malcolm waited in his car near the designated release point, his heart racing every time headlights appeared in his rearview mirror. Finally, just after 2 a.m., the transport van pulled up. The driver, one of Sarah's trusted colleagues, quickly unlocked the back doors before driving away. Jada emerged with the other protesters looking exhausted but unharmed. When she saw Malcolm, she ran to him, throwing herself into his arms. He held her tight, breathing in her familiar scent beneath the harsh smell of jail disinfectant. Are you okay? He whispered. I'm alive, Jada said, her voice hoarse but strong. She pulled back to look at him, and Malcolm saw the same fire in her eyes that had first made him fall in love with her. But they think we're just gonna let this go? After what they did to our baby girl? After what they're doing to our people? Malcolm led her to the car, helping her into the passenger seat. He pulled out his phone, showing her the prisoner logs they'd discovered. We're not just fighting back, he said, watching as she scrolled through the damning evidence. We're taking them down. Jada's hands tightened around the phone, her lawyer's mind already cataloging the legal implications of what she was seeing. The determination in her eyes matched Malcolm's own. They had tried to break their family, to silence their voices, to bury them in a corrupt system. But they had underestimated the strength of a family fighting for justice, the power of truth in the face of lies. The fluorescent lights in the parking garage cast harsh shadows as Malcolm pulled into level B3, following Sarah's cryptic directions. His headlights illuminated her figure standing near a concrete pillar, her police badge conspicuously absent from her usual spot on her belt. She looked different out of uniform, more human, less part of the system he'd grown to despise. Malcolm parked and stepped out, his footsteps echoing in the empty structure. Sarah glanced around nervously before approaching him, clutching something small in her hand. I had to make sure I wasn't followed, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. What I'm about to give you, it could get me killed. She held out a small black flash drive no bigger than her thumb. Malcolm took it, feeling the weight of what it represented more than its physical presence. What's on it, he asked, though part of him already knew. Sarah ran a hand through her hair, a gesture of obvious anxiety. Everything. I planted a hidden camera in the precinct's break room 3 months ago. You wouldn't believe the things they say when they think no one's watching. She pulled out her phone and played a short clip. The video quality wasn't perfect, but Malcolm could clearly see Officer Lawson and several other officers gathered around a table. Plant the gun near where the girl fell, one officer was saying. Make sure there are no prints. We'll say she grabbed it from behind the counter. Malcolm's hands clenched into fists as he watched Lawson laugh and respond. Already done. Who's gonna believe a black kid anyway? They'll eat up whatever story we feed them. Sarah stopped the video. There's hours more like that. They're talking about framing protesters, doctoring evidence against Naima, everything. And that's not all. She swiped to another video showing Police Chief Barrett in his office. They've been coordinating these cover-ups from the top down. Malcolm pocketed the flash drive, his mind already racing with possibilities. This is exactly what we needed. But why are you doing this? Why risk everything? Sarah's eyes hardened. Because my father was just like them, a cop who thought his badge made him God. I watched him plant evidence on innocent people my whole childhood. I became a cop to change things from the inside, but… She shook her head. Sometimes the only way to fix a corrupt system is to burn it down. Later that evening, Malcolm and Jada sat in their living room, reviewing the footage with Jamal Porter. The journalist's reputation preceded him. He'd broken stories on corruption before, faced death threats, and never backed down. But even he looked shaken by what he was seeing. "This is bigger than anything I've covered," Jamal said, pausing the video. "They're not just talking about individual cases. This is systematic. They've got a whole playbook for covering up racial killings." Jada leaned forward, her lawyer's instincts kicking in. "Can you air this? Legally?" "I can," Jamal nodded. "My editor's already cleared it, but…" He looked at them both seriously. "If I air this, they'll come after me, after you. Are you ready for that?" Malcolm didn't hesitate. "We're already in it." He thought of Naima in her hospital bed, of Jada in that police van, of countless other families who'd suffered the same fate. They started this war. We're just finally fighting back. Jamal began typing on his laptop while Malcolm prepared for the next phase of their plan. He drove to Officer Lawson's neighborhood, parking a few houses down from the target. The night was quiet, perfect for what he needed to do. Using his military training, Malcolm moved silently through the shadows until he reached Lawson's property. He planted the burner phone carefully concealed near an outdoor vent where it would pick up conversations from inside. The phone was programmed to auto-record and upload to a secure server. Meanwhile, across town, Sarah was working late at the precinct, using her security clearance to access restricted files. What she found made her blood run cold. A hidden case file detailing an internal investigation into something called the Brotherhood. The file contained photos of officers at secret meetings, financial records showing unexplained payments, and most damning of all, a list of incidents. Each one a racial killing that had been covered up. Naima's shooting was just the latest in a long pattern. Sarah quickly copied everything, her hands shaking as she restored the files to their hidden location. As she left the precinct, she sent a secure message to Malcolm. "Found something big. The Brotherhood. They're organized." The next morning, the story broke like a thunderclap across the city. Jamal's article went live at 6 a.m., accompanied by selected video clips from the precinct. By 7 a.m., every major news station was running the footage. The videos played on repeat, officers laughing about framing Naima, discussing how to plant evidence, Chief Barrett ordering cover-ups. Each new clip seemed more damning than the last. Lawson's past cases began surfacing, revealing a pattern of suspicious shootings, all ruled justified. The Brotherhood's existence became public knowledge, with financial records showing how deep the corruption went. Malcolm and Jada watched from home as their city erupted. Protesters filled the streets, but this time they carried copies of Jamal's article and screenshots from the videos. Police couldn't spin this as riots. The evidence was too clear, too damning. "Police corruption exposed, systematic racial targeting revealed," read the headlines. "Internal Brotherhood linked to multiple cover-ups," screamed another. Sarah's hidden camera footage played on every channel. "These people don't matter," Chief Barrett was saying in one clip. "Just clean it up like always." The morning news anchors could barely keep up with the developments. Multiple officers implicated. Internal affairs investigation launched. FBI involvement requested. Jada gripped Malcolm's hand as they watched their truth finally come to light. The system that had tried to bury them, that had shot their daughter and called her a criminal, was being exposed for what it really was. Through their living room window, they could see people gathering in the streets, their voices rising in unified demands for justice. The truth was out, and there would be no putting it back in the box. The morning after the expose aired, Police Chief Barrett stood at a hastily assembled podium outside police headquarters. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air as cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. "These so-called leaked videos are nothing more than sophisticated fabrications," Barrett declared, his voice straining to project authority. "Our forensic team has already identified clear signs of digital manipulation." Behind him, a row of stern-faced officers stood at attention, including Officer Lawson, who maintained a carefully blank expression. On the massive screen behind them, technical diagrams purported to show evidence of tampering in the surveillance footage. "Furthermore," Barrett continued, his face reddening, "we have credible intelligence that Malcolm Hayes, a trained military operative, is conducting what amounts to a terrorist campaign against our police force. His military background makes him especially dangerous." The assembled reporters erupted with questions, but Barrett raised his hand for silence. "This morning, I met with Mayor Thompson, who shares our grave concerns about Mr. Hayes' militant influence on our community." As if on cue, Mayor Thompson stepped up to the microphone. Her usual polished demeanor seemed slightly frayed around the edges. "In light of the growing unrest and the clear presence of militant elements in our city, I am announcing an immediate curfew from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. Anyone found on the streets during these hours will be subject to arrest." Malcolm watched the press conference on his phone, sitting in his parked car outside Naima's hospital. His jaw clenched as the mayor continued, "We cannot allow one man's vendetta to tear our city apart. Mr. Hayes' military training makes him a unique threat to public safety." Inside Naima's hospital room, the TV was showing the same press conference. Jada quickly switched it off as Malcolm entered, but Naima had already seen enough. "Daddy, why are they saying those things about you?" Naima asked, her small voice trembling. The bandages around her shoulders seemed especially stark against her hospital gown. Malcolm sat on the edge of her bed, taking her hand gently. "Sometimes, baby, when bad people get caught doing bad things, they try to blame the people who caught them." Jada touched his arm. "Malcolm, we need to talk." Her eyes carried a weight of worry he hadn't seen since the night of the shooting. In the hallway, Jada showed him her phone. Messages from friends warning them about unmarked police cars in their neighborhood, suspicious men watching their house. "They're going to come for you," she whispered. Malcolm nodded grimly. "I know. That's why we need to move Naima. Now." The doctors protested when Malcolm insisted on discharging Naima, but Jada's legal threats finally won them over. By afternoon, they were pulling up to Jada's sister Angela's house in a quiet suburb 30 minutes outside the city. Angela hugged Naima carefully, mindful of her injury. "She'll be safe here," she promised, her eyes meeting Malcolm's with understanding. "Nobody knows to look for her here." Malcolm knelt before his daughter. "Baby, you need to stay with Aunt Angela for a little while, just until things calm down." Naima's eyes filled with tears. "But I want to stay with you and Mommy." "I know, baby." Malcolm pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "But it's not safe for you at home right now. The bad people might try to hurt you again to get to me." "Are you going to be okay, Daddy?" Malcolm forced a smile. "Of course. Daddy's tough, remember? I'll come see you as soon as I can." The drive home was tense and silent. Malcolm noticed a black SUV that seemed to be following them, but he lost it with a few quick turns. When they arrived home, the street seemed unusually quiet. As night fell, Malcolm's military instincts went into high alert. He noticed the same cars driving past their house multiple times, dark figures moving between houses, the occasional glint of metal in the shadows. "They're coming tonight," he told Jada around midnight. "You need to leave." Jada shook her head. "I'm not leaving you." "Please." Malcolm took her hands. "I need to know you're safe. Go to your mother's. They won't look for you there." After a long argument, Jada finally agreed to leave. Malcolm watched from the window as she drove away, his heart heavy but relieved. At 2 a.m. they came. The first flashbang grenade crashed through the front window, followed immediately by two more through the back. Malcolm was already moving, having anticipated their entry points. The SWAT team burst through both doors simultaneously, their rifles sweeping the rooms. "Malcolm Hayes!" a voice boomed through a megaphone outside. "We have a warrant for your arrest. Come out with your hands up." Malcolm slipped through the shadows of his own home using the layout he knew by heart. He heard them clearing rooms below as he moved silently upstairs. An officer appeared at the top of the stairs, and Malcolm struck. Quick, efficient movements learned from years of combat training. The officer went down silently. More footsteps thundered up the stairs. Malcolm grabbed the unconscious officer's flashbang grenades and threw them down the stairwell. The resulting chaos bought him precious seconds. He ran to the master bedroom, where he'd already prepared his escape route. As SWAT officers filled the upstairs hallway, Malcolm slipped out the window onto the garage roof. He could hear them shouting inside, frustrated at finding an empty house. Then came the sound he'd been dreading, the distinctive pop of tear gas canisters being launched. Smoke began pouring from the windows. Malcolm knew what would come next. He dropped from the garage roof into the narrow space between houses just as the first flames appeared in the downstairs windows. The fire spread quickly, too quickly to be natural. They weren't trying to arrest him anymore. They were sending a message. Malcolm moved through backyards and alleyways, using every bit of his training to stay invisible. Behind him, sirens wailed as fire trucks arrived, but he knew they would be too late. The house was already engulfed. Finally, he reached a safe distance and found a high vantage point on a nearby building's roof. From there, he watched as his home burned, the flames reaching high into the night sky. Police cars blocked off the street while firefighters fought a losing battle against the inferno. Through a pair of binoculars, Malcolm could see Chief Barrett and Officer Lawson standing together, watching the fire with satisfaction. Barrett said something that made Lawson laugh. Malcolm's hands tightened into fists as he watched his home, the place where Naima took her first steps, where they'd shared so many family dinners, where they'd built their life, burned to the ground. "They just declared war," he whispered into the night air, his words carried away by the smoke rising into the dark sky. Malcolm moved silently through the city's abandoned industrial district, his military training serving him well. He'd ditched his phone, credit cards, and anything else that could be tracked. The only technology he kept was a secure satellite phone Sarah had given him, untraceable and connected to a private network. The warehouse Sarah had arranged was perfect: multiple exit points, clear sight lines, and enough abandoned buildings nearby to make surveillance difficult. Inside, he'd set up a basic living space: sleeping bag, portable stove, water jugs, and most importantly, his surveillance equipment. He watched the street through a small gap in the boarded windows. 3 police cruisers had passed in the last hour, more than usual for this area. They were expanding their search grid. Sarah's voice crackled through the satellite phone. "They've got checkpoints on major roads. Face recognition cameras are running citywide." "They're burning resources," Malcolm replied quietly. "Let them." Meanwhile, across town, Jada sat in a community center surrounded by local leaders. Maps and protest schedules covered the tables. She'd transformed her anger into action, organizing marches and legal clinics. "They think making Malcolm run will silence us," she told the group, her voice steady and determined. "But it's having the opposite effect. Every day he evades them, more people see through their lies." The door opened and a tall black man in a suit entered. The room tensed until he showed his badge. "I'm Agent Devin Cole, FBI," he said, his voice low. "Mrs. Hayes, can we talk privately?" In a small office, Cole sat across from Jada. His posture was professional, but his eyes held something else: understanding, maybe even sympathy. "The official story doesn't add up," Cole admitted, choosing his words carefully. "Your husband's military record is exemplary. The shooting of your daughter—" He paused, jaw tightening. The evidence was clearly tampered with. Jada leaned forward. "Then help us. You have the authority to investigate." Cole's laugh was bitter. "Authority? Mrs. Hayes, I grew up in neighborhoods like yours, watched the same things happen, made it to the FBI thinking I could change things from the inside." He shook his head. The system isn't built to help you, it's built to protect itself. Then break the system, Jada challenged, her eyes fierce. You have a choice, Agent Cole. Be part of the problem or part of the solution. While they talked, Malcolm was executing his riskiest move yet. Using Sarah's security codes and timing the shift changes perfectly, he slipped into the police headquarters evidence room. The hard drive he needed was logged as internal affairs pending investigation. His hands moved quickly, swapping the drive with an identical one. Just as he was about to leave, voices approached. Malcolm pressed himself against the wall behind a tall shelf. 2 officers walked in, laughing about something. Through the gaps between evidence boxes, Malcolm could see Officer Lawson. Chief wants us to step up patrols in the Hayes woman's neighborhood, Lawson said. Keep the pressure on. What about the husband? Barrett's orders are clear. If Hayes resists arrest, eliminate the threat. Lawson's voice turned cold. No witnesses this time. Malcolm's fists clenched, but he remained still. Minutes later, when they left, he slipped out and made his way back to the warehouse. The hard drive contained thousands of emails, internal memos, and video files. Malcolm's trained eye quickly found patterns: systematic corruption, covered-up shootings, planted evidence. But one email chain made his blood run cold. From Chief Barrett to Special Response Unit. Subject: Hayes situation. This situation has become untenable. Hayes's military background makes him a serious threat to department security. If he resists arrest, you are authorized to use lethal force. Make it clean. No witnesses, no cameras. This email will be deleted in 24 hours. Malcolm sat back, the implications clear. They weren't just trying to arrest him. They wanted him dead, with no one to tell the real story. In the warehouse's dim light, Malcolm set up his laptop and camera. He needed the world to know the truth, even if something happened to him. Sarah had arranged for Jamal to receive the footage securely. Malcolm looked directly into the camera, his face illuminated by the screen's glow. My name is Malcolm Hayes. A month ago, my daughter Naima was shot by police officer Greg Lawson. She was 9 years old, unarmed, just walking to a store in her own neighborhood. He held up documents to the camera. These are internal police records showing how they covered it up, how they've covered up dozens of similar shootings, how Police Chief Barrett ordered my execution to keep me quiet. His voice remained steady, but his eyes burned with controlled anger. They call me a terrorist because I exposed their crimes. They burned down my home because I refused to let them frame my daughter. They hunt me now because they know I have proof of their corruption. Malcolm leaned closer to the camera. But they don't want justice, they want us silent. I will not be silent. He attached the hard drive's contents to the video file and sent it to both Sarah and Jamal. Within minutes, Sarah confirmed receipt. Got it. Jamal's ready to go live with the story. Malcolm sat in the darkness of the warehouse, listening to distant sirens. The truth was out now. There was no going back. Malcolm crouched behind a stack of empty crates in the abandoned warehouse, his heart steady despite the tension. Sarah's voice crackled through his earpiece. SWAT teams are moving into position. Barrett and Lawson just arrived. Through the dusty windows, he could see police vehicles surrounding the building. Spotlights swept across the weathered brick walls, and officers in tactical gear took up positions at every exit. It was exactly what they wanted. They're buying it, Sarah whispered from her position across the street. She adjusted her police uniform, playing her role perfectly among the other officers. The anonymous tip about you hiding evidence here was too tempting for them to ignore. Malcolm checked his watch. The timing had to be perfect. He'd spent years in combat zones, but this felt different. This wasn't about survival or military objectives. This was about justice. For Naima, for his community, for every family that had suffered under Barrett's corrupt regime. Barrett's ordering them to breach in 5 minutes, Sarah reported. He wants to lead the arrest himself. Lawson's right behind him, looking nervous. Malcolm allowed himself a small smile. Of course Lawson was nervous. The man was a coward who only felt brave with a badge and backup. Outside, Chief Barrett's voice boomed through a megaphone. Malcolm Hayes, we have you surrounded. Come out with your hands up. That was their cue. Malcolm slipped through a pre-cut hole in the warehouse's back wall, carefully concealed behind overgrown bushes. As the SWAT team breached the front entrance with flashbangs and smoke grenades, he was already 3 blocks away, changing into a maintenance worker's uniform in Sarah's unmarked car. "They're clearing the building now," Sarah updated him as she drove them toward police headquarters. "Barrett's furious. He's ordering them to search every inch." The police headquarters building loomed ahead, its windows gleaming in the afternoon sun. With most of the force focused on the warehouse raid, security was minimal. Malcolm and Sarah walked in through the service entrance, their maintenance uniforms and Sarah's borrowed keycard getting them past the few remaining desk officers without a second glance. In the server room, Malcolm's fingers flew across the keyboard while Sarah kept watch. Years of military cyber operations training paid off as he bypassed the department's security protocols. One by one, he uploaded the stolen files to multiple public servers, emails ordering cover-ups, doctored evidence reports, body cam footage that had been lost, and the damning orders for his own elimination. "How long?" Sarah asked, tension in her voice. 2 more minutes, Malcolm replied, not taking his eyes off the screen. "How's the march looking?" Sarah checked her phone where a live news feed showed thousands of people filling the city's streets. Jada stood at the front, megaphone in hand, leading chants for justice. Community leaders flanked her, and news helicopters circled overhead broadcasting the massive demonstration to the nation. "It's working," Sarah said. "Every major network is covering it. Your wife is making sure they can't ignore this anymore." The upload completed with a soft chime. Malcolm quickly erased their digital footprints and nodded to Sarah. "Time for Phase 3. They separated in the hallway, Sarah heading down to join the returning officers, maintaining her cover, while Malcolm made his way to Barrett's office on the top floor. He knew the chief would return here first once he realized the warehouse raid was a diversion. Malcolm didn't have to wait long. He heard Barrett's angry voice before the office door flew open. The police chief stormed in, already loosening his tactical vest, not noticing Malcolm standing in the shadows behind the door. "Going somewhere?" Malcolm's voice was cold and steady. Barrett spun around, reaching for his weapon, but Malcolm was faster. In one fluid motion, he crossed the room and slammed Barrett against the wall, pinning him there with forearm pressed against his throat. "You framed my daughter," Malcolm said, his voice low but intense. "A 9-year-old girl. Then you made me the enemy when I dared to question it." Barrett struggled, his face reddening. "You don't know what you're talking about," he gasped. "No?" Malcolm pressed harder. "The emails ordering Lawson to plant evidence? The footage you deleted? The order to have me killed?" He leaned closer. "Now, the whole world knows." Through the office windows, Malcolm could see FBI vehicles pulling up to the building. Agent Cole stepped out, leading a team of federal agents through the front entrance. Barrett saw them too, and real fear finally crept into his eyes. Malcolm released his grip, letting Barrett slump against the wall. "They're not here for me," he said quietly. "They're here for you." He turned and walked toward the door, leaving Barrett trembling and gasping for air. The chief's empire of corruption was crumbling, and he knew it. Outside, federal agents were already walking in, their footsteps echoing up the stairwell. Barrett's hands trembled as he watched the federal agents pour into the precinct from his office window. The morning sun cast long shadows across his face, highlighting the beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Below, black SUVs with FBI markings continued to arrive, their lights flashing silently in the early morning light. Through the glass walls of his office, he could see his officers scrambling. Papers flew through the air as they rushed to shred documents. Computer screens flickered as files were hastily deleted. But Barrett knew it was futile. The evidence was already out there, spreading across every major news network like an unstoppable tide. On the television mounted on his office wall, CNN was playing Malcolm's leaked footage on a loop. Barrett's own voice echoed back at him. "Hayes needs to be eliminated. Make it look clean." The emails detailing the secret task force's operations flashed across the screen, along with body cam footage showing officers planting evidence on innocent civilians. "Chief?" Officer Martinez burst through the door, panic evident in his voice. "What do we do?" "They're coming up." Barrett couldn't answer. His eyes were fixed on another screen showing footage of his officers placing a gun near Naima's unconscious body. The timestamp clearly showed it happening after the shooting, destroying their official narrative completely. The sound of heavy boots on the stairs grew louder. Barrett's secretary was crying at her desk as agents in tactical gear swept through the office space. Files and computers were being seized, and officers were being detained. FBI agent Devin Cole entered Barrett's office first, his badge held high. 2 agents flanked him, their expressions grim. Cole's dark eyes met Barrett's, and there was no sympathy in them. "Michael Barrett," Cole's voice carried across the suddenly silent office floor. News cameras had somehow already made it inside, their lights illuminating the scene. "You are under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and civil rights violations." Barrett's legs gave out and he slumped into his chair. As Cole read him his rights, the chief could see his career, his life's work, crumbling before his eyes. The handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists with a finality that made him flinch. "You have the right to remain silent," Cole continued, his voice carrying clearly for the cameras. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Across town, Officer Greg Lawson threw clothes into a duffel bag, his movements frantic. His police radio crackled with chaos. Officers being arrested, evidence being seized, the entire corrupt system collapsing like a house of cards. He rushed out to his car, tossing the bag in the back seat. As he fumbled with his keys, a shadow fell across him. Lawson froze, recognizing the presence before he even turned around. Malcolm Hayes stood there, his stance relaxed but his eyes hard as steel. "Going somewhere, officer?" Lawson's hand instinctively reached for his weapon, but Malcolm moved faster than he could track. In an instant, Lawson found himself pressed against his car, his arm twisted behind his back. "Please," Lawson gasped, his bravado evaporating. "I was just following orders. Barrett said we had to maintain order in the neighborhoods. He said—" Malcolm spun him around, grabbing his collar. "That excuse didn't work at Nuremberg. It won't work here." His voice was controlled, but rage simmered beneath the surface. "My daughter was 9 years old. She was buying candy." Lawson's eyes darted around, looking for escape, but there was nowhere to run. "What are you going to do to me?" Malcolm pulled out a small camera. "You're going to tell the truth. All of it. On record." "They'll kill me," Lawson whispered. "You should have thought about consequences before you shot a child." Malcolm set up the camera on the hood of Lawson's car. The morning light was perfect, highlighting every detail of the officer's face as he began to speak. "My name is Officer Greg Lawson," he started, his voice shaking. "On the night of April 15th, I shot Naima Hayes. She was unarmed." Tears began rolling down his cheeks. "We planted the gun afterward. It was standard procedure for the task force. If we shot someone, we'd plant evidence to justify it." He continued speaking, detailing years of corruption, planted evidence, and covered up shootings. He named names, dates, locations. Everything Barrett had ordered them to do, every crime they had committed under the badge. When it was done, Malcolm grabbed Lawson's arm. Time to face justice. The FBI field office was buzzing with activity when Malcolm walked in with Lawson. Agents stopped and stared as Malcolm led the trembling officer to the front desk. "Special delivery for Agent Cole," he said calmly. 2 agents immediately took custody of Lawson, leading him away to an interrogation room. Malcolm watched him go, feeling no satisfaction, only a deep weariness. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Jada's name flashed on the screen and his heart skipped a beat as he answered. "Malcolm." Jada's voice was thick with tears, but he could hear the smile in it. "She's awake. Naima's awake." Malcolm leaned against the wall, his legs suddenly weak with relief. After everything, the corruption, the fights, the revelations, this was what mattered. His daughter was alive. She was awake. "She's asking for you," Jada continued. "She wants her daddy." Malcolm closed his eyes, letting the tears fall freely. Around him, the FBI building continued its frantic activity. Barrett was being processed somewhere in the building. Lawson was confessing to his crimes. The corrupt system they had built was being dismantled piece by piece. But none of that mattered right now. His daughter was calling for him, and this time, nothing would stop him from being there. Malcolm and Jada sat on either side of Naima's hospital bed, their hands gently holding hers. The steady beep of monitors filled the quiet room, and sunlight streamed through the window, casting a warm glow on their daughter's face. They had been waiting for hours, watching every small movement, every flutter of her eyelids. Jada squeezed Naima's hand softly, her thumb tracing circles on her daughter's palm. The bandages around Naima's shoulder were fresh and white, a stark reminder of how close they had come to losing her. Dark circles under Jada's eyes betrayed sleepless nights spent in this very chair, praying for this moment. Malcolm leaned forward in his chair, his military posture forgotten as he watched his daughter's face intently. The past weeks had aged him. New lines creased his forehead, and gray hairs had appeared at his temples. But now, as Naima's eyes began to flutter open, years seemed to fall away from his face. "Baby," Jada whispered, her voice trembling. "Can you hear us?" Naima's eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the light. She blinked several times, her gaze moving between her parents' faces. Her lips were dry, and when she tried to speak, only a small sound came out. Malcolm quickly reached for the water cup on the bedside table, helping her take small sips through a straw. The simple act of holding the cup made his hands shake. How many times had he done this before, giving her water after violin practice or late-night studying? But this time was different. This time was a miracle. After drinking, Naima's voice came out as a whisper, weak but clear. "Daddy?" "I'm here, baby," Malcolm said, his voice thick with emotion. He squeezed her hand gently. "Daddy's right here." Naima's eyes focused on him, and despite her weakness, there was awareness in them. She remembered. "Did you stop them, Daddy?" Malcolm felt tears well up in his eyes. He thought about Barrett in handcuffs, about Lawson's confession, about the corrupt system being exposed piece by piece. He thought about the price they'd paid to get here, their home destroyed, their lives turned upside down, their safety threatened. But looking at his daughter's face, he knew it had all been worth it. "Yeah, baby," he nodded, letting the tears fall freely. "I stopped them." Jada reached across the bed, taking Malcolm's free hand in hers, completing their circle. They sat there together, a family reunited, as Naima drifted back into a peaceful sleep. Outside the hospital, the city was still in turmoil. The arrests of Barrett, Lawson, and dozens of other officers had sparked both celebration and outrage. Protesters filled the streets, but this time their signs carried different messages. Justice for Naima had become reform the system, and change starts now. Community leaders organized peaceful marches through every neighborhood, demanding real institutional change. They didn't want just a few bad officers removed. They wanted complete reform of police training, accountability measures, and community oversight. Sarah Nolan was experiencing the cost of standing up against corruption firsthand. She sat in her empty apartment, surrounded by packed boxes. Her police badge and gun lay on the coffee table. Surrendered that morning when she was officially terminated from the force. The official reason was conduct unbecoming an officer, but everyone knew the truth. She had crossed the thin blue line, and now she was paying the price. Her phone buzzed constantly with threatening messages from former colleagues. "Traitor," they called her. "Rat." Malcolm found her there, staring at her badge. He knocked on the open door frame, and she looked up with tired eyes. "They're really making you move?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Sarah nodded. "Landlord got some pressure. Said I'm a security risk to the building." She laughed bitterly. "Funny how quick they turn on you when you do the right thing." Malcolm walked in, looking at the boxes. "You did more than the right thing. You helped save my daughter's life. You helped expose the truth." "And what did it cost?" Sarah gestured around her apartment. "My career is over. No department will touch me now. I'm blacklisted." "You're a hero," Malcolm said firmly. "And heroes don't always get medals. Sometimes they just get the knowledge that they did what needed to be done." Sarah smiled slightly, the first real smile he'd seen from her in days. You sound like one of those inspirational posters in the precinct break room. Later that afternoon, Malcolm sat across from Agent Devin Cole in a small coffee shop downtown. The FBI agent looked tired but satisfied, like a man who had just finished a long but successful mission. "Barrett's singing like a bird," Cole said, stirring his coffee. "He's naming names, dates, everything. We're looking at corruption going back decades." Malcolm nodded, but something in Cole's tone made him pause. "But..." Cole leaned forward, his voice low. "But you need to understand something, Hayes. You exposed them, but they aren't gone. The system doesn't change overnight." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying there are more Barretts out there. More corrupt precincts, more covered-up shootings. What you did here? It's just the beginning." Malcolm thought about Naima in her hospital bed, about Sarah losing everything for doing the right thing, about all the families who hadn't gotten justice yet. He nodded slowly. "Then I won't stop fighting." The memorial wall stood in a quiet corner of the city park, a testament to lives cut short by police violence. Malcolm walked slowly along its length, reading names. Some were recent. He recognized them from news reports. Others were older, their stories almost forgotten except by the families they left behind. He stopped at a fresh section of the wall, where Naima's name would have been added if things had gone differently. His fists clenched at his sides as he looked at the names surrounding that empty space. Each one represented a family like his, a child like Naima, a story that ended differently. "This isn't justice," he said quietly to the wall of names. "Justice is making sure this never happens again." The federal courthouse buzzed with tension as people filed into the crowded courtroom. Journalists clutched their notepads, their pens poised to capture every detail. Community activists wore "Justice for Naima" buttons, while rows of uniformed police officers sat stone-faced in support of their former chief. Malcolm adjusted his tie, feeling the weight of his military medals pinned to his suit jacket. Jada squeezed his hand, her face a mask of quiet determination. They had waited months for this day, watching as the prosecution built their case against Greg Lawson and Michael Barrett. The defendants sat at separate tables, their expensive lawyers flanking them. Barrett maintained his usual air of authority, though his police uniform had been replaced by a tailored suit. Lawson looked smaller somehow, hunched forward and pale. Nothing like the arrogant officer who had shot Naima. When the judge entered, silence fell over the courtroom. The opening statements began, and Barrett's lawyer stood first, his voice smooth and practiced. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "what we have here is a case built on lies and manipulation. The prosecution would have you believe that my client, a decorated police chief with 30 years of service, orchestrated some grand conspiracy. But the real conspiracy here comes from Malcolm Hayes, a trained military operative who used violent tactics to wage war against our police force." The prosecutor started to object, but the judge was already speaking, her voice sharp with disapproval. "Counselor," she warned, "I've reviewed the evidence. Mr. Hayes' actions exposed criminal behavior within your client's department. If you continue trying to paint the victim's father as a terrorist, I will hold you in contempt. Stick to defending your client's actions if you can." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Barrett's lawyer faltered, his carefully prepared narrative crumbling. He finished his statement quickly, sitting down with a frustrated huff. The prosecution's opening was brief but powerful, laying out the evidence of corruption, cover-ups, and the direct orders that led to Naima's shooting. When Malcolm was called to testify, the courtroom grew completely still. He walked to the witness stand with military precision, his back straight, his eyes forward. After being sworn in, he sat and looked out at the sea of faces, some hostile, some supportive, all waiting to hear his story. "Mr. Hayes," the prosecutor began, "please tell us about your military service." Malcolm's voice filled the courtroom, steady and clear. "I served 12 years in the Delta Force, multiple combat deployments, Bronze Star, Purple Heart. I trained other soldiers in advanced tactics and strategy. And why did you serve? To protect American values, to defend our Constitution, to keep our people safe." Malcolm's gaze swept across the jury. "I fought for my country. I killed for my country, and when I came home, I had to fight again, against the very people sworn to protect my family." His eyes locked onto Barrett, who couldn't hold his stare. "You didn't just fail my daughter, you failed this country." The defense tried to rattle Malcolm during cross-examination, but his responses remained measured and precise. He described finding Naima bleeding on the sidewalk, the false police reports, the threatening phone calls, the raid on his home. With each answer, the jury leaned forward, hanging on every word. When Sarah Nolan took the stand, she looked different from her days as a detective. Gone was the badge and uniform, replaced by civilian clothes. But her testimony carried the weight of someone who had seen the corruption from the inside. "I accessed the internal servers," she explained, as evidence files appeared on the courtroom screens. These emails show Chief Barrett instructing officers to plant evidence, falsify reports, and cover up misconduct, especially in cases involving black civilians. She walked the jury through document after document, the secret task force assignments, the coded language used to identify target neighborhoods, the unofficial quota system for arrests in minority communities. Barrett's face grew redder with each revelation. "And this," Sarah said, pulling up a final email, "is Chief Barrett's direct order regarding Malcolm Hayes. If he resists, eliminate the threat. Make it clean." The most powerful moment came when the prosecution played the unedited body camera footage from Naima's shooting. The defense tried to prevent it, but the judge ordered it shown. The entire courtroom watched as Naima walked out of the store empty-handed. They heard Lawson shout conflicting commands. They saw her small hands raise in confusion and fear. Then came the shot. Quick, unnecessary, devastating. Lawson was forced to watch his own actions, his face growing paler by the second. When the video showed him planting a gun near Naima's unconscious body, several jurors visibly recoiled. The deliberations lasted just 4 hours. When the jury returned, the forewoman stood, her voice firm. In the case of the United States versus Michael Barrett on the charge of conspiracy to violate civil rights under color of law, we find the defendant guilty. She continued through Barrett's charges: guilty of obstruction of justice, guilty of witness tampering, guilty of conspiracy to commit evidence tampering. In the case of the United States versus Greg Lawson, on the charge of attempted murder, we find the defendant guilty. The verdicts continued: guilty of civil rights violations, guilty of evidence tampering, guilty of filing false reports. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Activists hugged each other, crying. Journalists rushed for the doors, racing to break the news. The police officers filed out silently, their faces dark with anger or shame. Malcolm released a deep breath, feeling the tension of months finally leaving his body. Jada wrapped her arms around him, tears streaming down her face. Behind them, Sarah smiled, nodding in satisfaction. 6 months after the trial, Malcolm walked through the newly renovated halls of the Hayes Community Center. The building, once an abandoned warehouse, now hummed with purpose and possibility. Sunlight streamed through large windows, illuminating colorful murals depicting civil rights leaders and community heroes. In the main training room, a group of teenagers practiced self-defense techniques under the watchful eye of a veteran instructor. Malcolm paused to observe, noting their focused expressions and determined movements. The sight brought a small smile to his face. These kids wouldn't grow up helpless. "Looking good in here," Sarah Nolan said, appearing beside him. She'd traded her detective's badge for a civil rights investigator's credentials, and the change suited her. There was an ease to her movements now, free from the weight of a corrupt system. "The legal education program starts next week," Malcolm replied, leading her through the building. "We've got lawyers volunteering to teach kids about their rights, how the system works, how to protect themselves, legally." They passed a computer lab where students learned about cybersecurity and digital investigation techniques. In another room, a former state representative taught a class on local politics and community organizing. "It's more than I imagined," Sarah admitted, running her hand along a wall covered with photographs. Faces of those lost to police violence, now serving as both memorial and motivation. "When you first mentioned turning this place into a community center, I didn't realize how comprehensive it would be." Malcolm stopped at a window overlooking the basketball court, where kids played under the supervision of community volunteers. "Knowledge is power," he said quietly. "These kids need to understand the system to change it. They need to know their rights, their history, their potential." Sarah nodded, then checked her watch. "Almost time for the ceremony. You ready?" Malcolm straightened his jacket. "Let's go." They made their way to the main auditorium where people were already gathering. The space had been transformed, with rows of chairs facing a small stage. At the center sat a single chair and a music stand. Jada stood near the entrance, greeting people and accepting congratulations on the success of her legal defense fund. In 6 months, she'd helped dozens of families fight back against police misconduct, providing resources and representation to those who couldn't afford it. 3 more cases won this week, she told Malcolm as he approached, her eyes bright with satisfaction. "The fund is making a real difference. People aren't fighting alone anymore." The crowd settled into their seats as Naima appeared backstage. She wore a simple blue dress, her violin case clutched tightly in her hands. The scar on her shoulder was barely visible now, but Malcolm knew it still bothered her sometimes, not from pain but from memory. "You sure you're ready?" he asked softly, kneeling beside her. Naima nodded, her chin lifted with determination. "I've been practicing for months, Daddy. I want to play again. I need to." Malcolm hugged her gently, careful of the violin. "Then show them what you've got, baby girl." The audience fell silent as Naima walked onto the stage. She moved carefully, deliberately, each step a statement of resilience. When she lifted the violin to her shoulder, her hands were steady. The first notes filled the air, clear, pure, and strong. Malcolm recognized the piece, Amazing Grace, but arranged differently, woven through with elements of gospel and soul. Naima had chosen it herself, working with her music teacher to create something new. As she played, the room seemed to hold its breath. Some closed their eyes, swaying slightly. Others wiped away tears. Malcolm watched his daughter, seeing not just the trauma she'd survived, but the strength she'd found in its wake. The final note lingered in the air, and for a moment, no one moved. Then the applause began, building into a standing ovation. Naima smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes, something Malcolm hadn't seen since before the shooting. As people crowded around to congratulate Naima, Malcolm's phone buzzed. The screen showed Agent Cole's number. "Excuse me," he murmured to Jada, stepping into a quiet hallway. "Cole? What's wrong?" "We've got a situation." Cole's voice was tense. "Remember those task force documents we found in Barrett's files? The operational guidelines, the cover-up protocols?" "Yeah," Malcolm's jaw tightened. "What about them?" "Just intercepted similar documents from a precinct in Memphis. They're trying to set up the same kind of operation. Different names, same playbook." Malcolm's free hand curled into a fist. "How far along are they?" "Early stages, but moving fast. They learned from Barrett's mistakes. They're being more careful, more subtle, but the intent is the same." "Send me everything you have," Malcolm said, his voice hard. "And Cole, thank you for the heads up." He ended the call and walked to the window. The city stretched out before him, a maze of streets and buildings where both justice and corruption lived side by side. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Malcolm's reflection stared back at him, his expression hardened with determination. "They thought this was over," he said quietly, "but it's just the beginning." Behind him, the sounds of celebration continued. Naima's music, people's laughter, the buzz of community and hope. But Malcolm's mind was already racing, planning the next battle in a war that seemed far from over. The grand opening of the Naima Hayes Youth Center buzzed with energy as hundreds of community members gathered in the main auditorium. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the newly painted walls adorned with murals of civil rights leaders and messages of hope. The space, once an abandoned community center, now stood as a beacon of change and resilience. Malcolm stood at the podium, his presence commanding yet warm as he surveyed the eager faces before him. He wore a crisp navy suit, but his expression carried the same determination that had driven him through months of battle against corruption. "This center," he began, his voice carrying through the packed room, "represents more than just a building. It represents our commitment to protecting our children, to teaching them their rights, and to ensuring they grow up knowing their worth." The audience nodded in agreement, many wiping away tears. In the front row, Sarah Nolan sat beside Agent Cole, both having shed their official roles to support this community initiative. Jada stood near the stage, her legal briefcase at her feet, pride evident in her stance. "But today," Malcolm continued, his voice softening, "I want to introduce someone who inspired all of this, someone who showed us what true strength looks like." He turned toward the side of the stage. "My daughter, Naima Hayes." The crowd erupted in applause as Naima stepped onto the stage. She walked with careful steps, still bearing the physical remnants of her ordeal, but her head was held high. She wore a yellow dress that seemed to catch the sunlight, and her smile illuminated the room even more than the streaming sunshine. Malcolm watched his daughter approach the podium, his heart swelling with pride. Though she still carried the scars of that terrible night, she had refused to let fear define her. She reached the podium and looked up at her father, sharing a smile that spoke volumes about their journey together. Later that afternoon, as families explored the center's facilities, Sarah pulled Malcolm aside into one of the quiet study rooms. Her business suit had replaced her detective's uniform, but she carried herself with the same purposeful energy. "The center is amazing, Malcolm," she said, closing the door behind them. "But we need to talk about what's happening in other cities." Malcolm leaned against a desk, crossing his arms. "What have you found?" "3 more precincts showing the same patterns we saw here. Corrupt officers, planted evidence, targeted harassment." Sarah pulled out her tablet, showing him the data. "We took down 1 precinct, but this fight isn't over. Corruption is everywhere." Malcolm studied the information, his jaw tightening. "Send me the details. We'll start building cases." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock. Agent Cole entered, his FBI badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. He closed the door carefully behind him. "Malcolm," Cole said, his voice low and serious, "we need to discuss security measures." He glanced at Sarah, who nodded in understanding. "There are people who see you as a threat, Malcolm. Be careful. Certain factions within law enforcement are still planning to retaliate." "Let them try," Malcolm replied, his voice steady. "We're not hiding anymore." In another part of the building, Jada stood before a group of families, explaining the new statewide legal fund she had established. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had fought the system and won. "This fund isn't just about money," she explained to the attentive audience. "It's about support, resources, and knowing you're not alone. No family should have to face police brutality without proper legal representation." As the day wound down and the crowds thinned, Malcolm, Jada, and Naima found themselves sitting on their front porch at home. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, casting a peaceful glow over their neighborhood. For the first time in months, there was a genuine sense of tranquility. Malcolm sat in the middle of the porch swing with Naima on one side and Jada on the other. His arm rested protectively around his daughter's shoulders as they gently swayed back and forth, watching the sky change colors. "Naima," Malcolm said softly, looking down at his daughter. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Naima looked up at him, her eyes bright with determination. A gentle breeze ruffled her hair as she grinned confidently. "A lawyer," she declared, "so nobody can ever do this to us again." Malcolm chuckled, the sound warm and genuine, full of pride at his daughter's strength and conviction. Jada reached across and squeezed Naima's hand, her eyes glistening with tears of joy and determination. The family sat together, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the sky, sharing a moment of perfect peace. The porch swing creaked gently as they swayed, and the evening air carried the sweet scent of blooming jasmine from their garden. 1 year after the opening of the Naima Hayes Youth Center, Malcolm stood at the podium in a large auditorium at Fort Benning Military Training Facility. The room was filled with young recruits, their faces attentive as he spoke about his experiences and the systemic issues plaguing law enforcement. Power isn't just about carrying a weapon or wearing a badge, Malcolm explained, his voice carrying through the hushed room. It's about understanding the responsibility that comes with authority. When that power is abused, when bias drives decisions, we betray everything we're meant to protect. He clicked through slides showing statistics, body camera footage, and documented cases of racial profiling. The recruits watched intently, many taking notes, others shifting uncomfortably in their seats as the reality of these issues became clear. This isn't about pointing fingers, Malcolm continued, his tone measured but firm. This is about acknowledging a problem that affects all of us. When law enforcement loses the trust of the community, it serves. Everyone suffers. After the lecture, as recruits filed out of the auditorium, a young black soldier lingered behind. He approached Malcolm hesitantly, his posture straight, but his eyes revealing inner conflict. Malcolm recognized that look. He'd seen it in his own reflection years ago. "Sir," the recruit began, his voice quiet but earnest. "I joined because I wanted to protect people like us. But now, I don't know if I can change anything." His shoulders slumped slightly, the weight of his doubts visible in his stance. Malcolm stepped closer, placing a steady hand on the young man's shoulder. The gesture was both paternal and understanding. "You don't change the system by standing outside of it," he said firmly. "You change it from within." Across town at Roosevelt Middle School, the auditorium was packed with students, teachers, and parents. Naima Hayes stood on stage, her presence both gentle and powerful. She had grown taller over the past year, and though a slight limp remained from her injury, she carried herself with grace and determination. "When I was shot," she began, her voice clear and steady, "many people expected me to be afraid forever. They thought I would hide, that I would let fear win." She paused, looking out at the captivated audience. "But fear isn't stronger than hope, it isn't stronger than justice." Her violin rested on a stand beside her, its polished surface gleaming under the stage lights. After her speech, she lifted it to her shoulder, positioning it with practiced ease. The room fell completely silent as she began to play. The melody that filled the auditorium was entirely her own composition, a piece she had written during her recovery. It started soft and hesitant, like a whispered question, then grew stronger, more insistent. The music spoke of pain, of struggle, but also of triumph and resilience. When she reached the final notes, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Meanwhile, across the country, Sarah Nolan and Jada Hayes were making waves of their own. Their joint investigative efforts had uncovered similar patterns of corruption in police departments from Chicago to Los Angeles. Sarah's insider knowledge combined with Jada's legal expertise had become a powerful force for change. In a downtown office in Seattle, Jada presented evidence to a panel of federal investigators. "This isn't isolated," she explained, spreading documents across the table. "The same tactics, the same cover-ups, the same abuse of power. It's a systemic issue that demands systemic change." Sarah, standing beside her, added her own findings. "We've documented over 50 cases in the past year alone. Each one shows the same pattern of racial profiling, evidence tampering, and departmental cover-ups." Later that night, Malcolm walked alone through the streets of a different city, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets. The air was cool, and streetlights cast long shadows on the pavement. Ahead of him, he noticed police lights flashing, a traffic stop in progress. His body tensed automatically as he saw a young black teenager step out of his car, hands raised. The scene was too familiar, too close to home. Malcolm's fingers curled into fists in his pockets as he watched, ready to intervene if necessary. But then something different happened. A black officer stepped forward from the patrol car, his manner calm and professional. He spoke quietly with the teenager, checked his license, and then did something unexpected. He smiled and handed back the documents. Malcolm watched as the officer explained something to the teen, gesturing at a taillight that needed fixing. The tension in the scene dissipated. The teenager nodded, got back in his car, and drove away safely. No escalation, no violence, no tragedy. Exhaling slowly, Malcolm felt some of his own tension release. Change was happening. Slowly, sometimes painfully slowly, but it was happening. He watched the patrol car pull away, its lights now dark, and thought about how far they'd come, and how far they still had to go. He turned and walked into the darkness, his steps measured and purposeful. He wasn't just a soldier anymore, fighting battles in distant lands. He was a father, a protector, an agent of change, fighting for something far more precious, a future where his daughter could live without fear. War never truly ends, he whispered to himself as he walked. But maybe, just maybe, we're finally winning. If you enjoyed the story of Malcolm, I handpicked this next story that you will love. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.